Bills Mafia. On tonight's Air Raid Hour, we will be breaking down what to look for in regards to defensive players as Brandon Beane and company head to Indianapolis for the NFL Combine. But first,
welcome to the Air Raid Hour, a Cover One Network podcast. Here are your hosts, Judge Mathis and Tilt Money.
welcome in, ladies and gentlemen, to the Air Raid Hour presented by the Cover One Sports Network and Picasso's Pizza. My name is Steve Mathis. You can find me on X at the Bills Guys, joined as always by Dave Tilton. You can find him on Twitter at Tilt Money. And Dave, I wanted to start tonight's conversation with what the NFL Combine really is all about, because that's the topic of our next four shows today, Thursday, next Monday, and next Thursday. We will be previewing and then recapping the NFL Combine. And players aren't, or at least they shouldn't be, catapulting themselves to the top of the draft boards because of their workout in glorified Spanx. This exercise over the course of the next week is simply to check a box. Maybe someone's test scores raise an eyebrow positively, and that sends a team back to the tape, or vice versa. Maybe they don't test so well, and you have to go back and you have to recheck stuff. But despite what the fans see on NFL Network and on ABC and on ESPN, the underwear Olympics portion of the NFL Combine, the real work going on this week is in the interview rooms, which we as Bills fans have firsthand knowledge of just how important that is, and the medicals. The medical examinations are really important this week as well.
Yeah, and I think what you said initially is the key, right? Is that there really shouldn't be a ton of, how do you say, like, there shouldn't be a guy all of a sudden who is third round on tape as all of a sudden jumps into the first round because of what happens at the combine, right? I think the way you put it makes perfect sense. You have a guy, maybe he tests well, that you didn't watch a ton of film on, and maybe you go back and you watch that film if you're a GM or the scouting department, and you kind of either reconfirm or get some more information on that player that you didn't have, or vice versa, right? If the guy, his film looks really good, but he didn't test well, maybe he went through a minor injury at the end of the season, or maybe there's something that you'll learn through the interview process around that person's current health. And so at the end of the day, this is one piece of the equation that goes into the overall process. Although with as big as the NFL has gotten, every individual event, it seems like, is becoming its own entity. And the combine certainly has been at the forefront of that for a while for the NFL. So it's kind of hard, I guess, sometimes to kind of really see the forest for the trees here and realize this is one of many things that goes into the overall. But you're right. There's more that's going on in Indy than just, just the on-field testing. There's the interviews. There's potential for teams to be negotiating with their current players before the new league year starts, right, that are set to become free agents. The new league year hasn't started yet. So you have a chance, if you have a guy that's becoming a pending UFA, or if there's a guy who's an RFA, you have a chance to tender that person. A UFA, you got a chance to maybe give one last pitch to bring that guy back, get him under contract before the league year starts. So there's a lot going on this week. It's a fun week, and usually a lot of the big news is actually stuff that doesn't happen on the field. It's stuff that happens off.
Yeah, I mean, we found out after draft day, when Kyrie Elam was drafted a couple of seasons ago, how important the combine was, and it had nothing to do with what he did on the field. It was how impressive he was when he interviewed with the team, and they showed sort of the Bills embedded, and they went behind the scenes and they showed that whole interview process. There's that now really infamous video of Brandon Beane watching Gabe Davis run the 40 and hoping that he runs slower than expected because he loved what he saw on the tape so much that he didn't want Gabriel Davis to elevate his draft stock at all in Indianapolis because he sort of was dead set on taking him in the 4th round of the draft. So it shows sort of the importance of what goes on in Indy, but also that there are just so many different factors to the equation as well. And we're going to be talking about all of that stuff tonight as we preview the combine. Specifically tonight, we're going to be focusing on the defense. And then on Thursday, we're going to be focusing on the offense. The reason why we're starting with the defense is because the defense is what gets started first. So Thursday, you're going to get the defensive line working out. And on Friday, you're going to get other position groups on defense working out. You're really not getting much of the offense outside, I think, like tight ends until Saturday. So we want to have this show on Monday to talk about defensive prospects, and then Thursday show we'll talk about offensive prospects. But before we do, just a couple of news and notes here. If you haven't already, please consider the Cover One Pass. You can go to cover1.net and you can subscribe now. You will get all the NFL free agent news that you need. If you're looking for scouting reports, if you're looking for team fits or player fits for the Buffalo Bills and free agency, Cover One Pass has got you covered. You're really not going to see this around the league. You see a million scouting reports for draft picks. You don't see scouting reports for pending free agents. So Cover One's got you covered there. And if you're draft junkies like us, head on over to Cover One College Football YouTube station and subscribe now to the Cover One College Football YouTube station as well. John and Daniel's going to be in Indianapolis, boots on the ground for us, reporting live, and Cover One Draft Weekly. They do a great all-encompassing NFL draft podcast. So you're going to want to check that out as well. But let's get things started tonight, Dave, with the defensive line.
Yeah.
And I want to start with defensive line because I think both edge and IDL are both options for the Buffalo Bills as early as pick 28. Now, starting specifically with edge, I think these are probably the top 5 guys who are in play to be like first round picks at edge. There are some other guys who could sneak in to the back half of the first round as well. And we'll talk about those guys as well. But obviously, Letty Latu is probably the bona fide edge one in a lot of people's books. Medicals are going to be huge for him in Indianapolis. Obviously, he had his issues at USC before transferring to UCLA. The Alabama edge, Dallas Turner. A lot of people are talking about him, saying he's got like a ceiling that's higher than Will Anderson's was. And Will Anderson was the 2nd overall pick just a season ago, or excuse me, the 3rd overall pick just a season ago. Obviously, the floor is a lot lower as well, but Dallas Turner's got that ceiling. You got Jared Verse out of Florida State, that's sort of that power edge. You got Chop Robinson, the athletic freak who played for Manny Diaz, who was the defensive coordinator at Penn State, who's got familiarity with Sean McDermott. His production isn't there, even though he's probably going to blow up Indy with his testing numbers. And then you have Darius Robinson, the Senior Bowl darling. The testing really solidify him as a first rounder, and he's really trending to be a top 40 pick in the draft. You never know what happens, right? You never know what happens in April when the draft comes around. So one of the top 3, Latu, Turner, Verse, theoretically, maybe for some odd reason, like a run on wide receivers or something like that, the Bills could find themselves in a position to take one of these guys or trade up a few spots to grab one of these guys. You doubt it. You really, really doubt it. But you got to check those boxes in Indy, and you got to do your research on some of these guys.
I think the Bills will be doing their homework on a wide range of edge players. But yes, especially these top guys, I think in the chance that one of these guys does slip and you have a chance to pick one, you are going to want to be you want to have all those boxes checked, like you said, and you want to know the ins and outs of these guys. Latu obviously being the one that I think, he is edge number 1 for me. And I think if without those medicals, he'd be like by far and away the cream of the class here. I mean, the dude just looks like a Jalen Phillips clone when you put it on, and he's been comped to him numerous times. But you're right, and the reason this is important is because edge has to be in consideration for the Bills at pick 28, given the state of the defensive line right now. And you are going into this season right now with Von Miller as your starting, one of your starting edges, and Greg Rousseau on the other side. But you're talking about Von Miller, a guy who at the end of the season was playing 10, 15 snaps for you, had no sacks last year for the Bills, only had a couple tackles, as it were.
Mm-hmm.
And behind him, you have guys like Kingsley Jonathan and Cameron Klein, right? Depending on where you kind of see Cameron Klein as an edge or you're a defender. So it's quite thin, and it's a premium position, right? And so
Mm-hmm.
Bills will need to do their homework on these guys. Maybe some more than others, more likely to be there at pick 28, like Chop Robinson you mentioned. But at the end of the day, the Bills need to do their homework on all five of them.
And Chop Robinson is the interesting one, right? Darius Robinson, I'm sold on Darius Robinson at 28 personally. His numbers in Indy, if they're really well, like if they're really good, will just make me feel even better about it. But I love Darius Robinson. I love the arm length. I love the inside outside flexibility. I just like the fact that he's sort of like a power rusher, sort of going back to some of the older school things that maybe the Buffalo Bills used to do before getting sort of the bendier edges like a Von Miller. I like Darius Robinson. Chop Robinson, on the other hand, like you get like Aaron Maben type of vibes from him, not in the sense that their body types are the same, because they're not. But this is a guy in Chop Robinson who had 4.5 sacks at Penn State last year. The production has never been there at Penn State, but the ceiling athletically is through the absolute roof. This is a projection that you're making with Chop Robinson. And I'll tell you what, as a fan sitting at home, I've just never been comfortable with projections. I'm not a big fan of boomer bust guys. I always like the safe picks, like the Darius Robinson. So I'm team Darius Robinson. I'm looking for him to hopefully test well enough to really solidify himself at pick 28, if that's the decision the Buffalo Bills make. I'll be intrigued. I'm going to keep an eye out for Chop Robinson. I'm going to see how he tests, but I don't know how well he could test that would really sell me on the Buffalo Bills making that selection at pick 28.
Who was it? Was it OA? Was the Penn State athletic freak from a couple years ago? I mean,
FOA, yeah.
I mean, I'm not saying to scout the helmet here, but it's like that's an example of a guy who was an athletic freak, and I know he's still. Maybe he's having you just don't hear about him, right? At this point, at least from my perspective, you don't hear a ton about him. I mean, Chop Robinson, there's some advanced metrics that look okay on him, right? But at the end of the day, you have to really be confident in that pick if you're going to make that pick there. Like you mentioned, he only had 3 sacks, 18 hurries. He did get a really good pass rush grade from PFF last year, their 4th best pass rush grade out of all edge players with a minimum 100 snaps. So like there's some grading there that you can look at and maybe go back and look at film to see if that sort of lines up. But I would be very nervous with that pick. I don't know how I would feel about that at pick 28, to be honest.
It'll be really interesting to see how some of these like day 2, maybe borderline day 1 guys in like Adiza Isaac and Chris Braswell, how they separate themselves. And I'll be keeping an eye on all of these guys. So you obviously have Darius Robinson, who's a back half around 1 guy, Chop Robinson. I just mentioned Adiza Isaac, Chris Bradwell, Jonah Ellis, Braylon Trice out of Washington, Austin Booker, Gabriel Murphy, Marshawn Nealand, Xavier Thomas, Javon Solomon, Brandon Dorless, and Khalid Duke. These are all day 2 guys who they can make some moves up and down, like not drastic moves, as we mentioned at the top of the show, but these are guys who have a chance to go in there and interview well, test well, impress, and maybe really solidify themselves in the early parts of day 2 or the later parts of day 2. Are any of those names there intriguing to you?
I like Trice a little bit from Washington. I like Gabriel Murphy. I kind of like a little bit. He seemed to show up on some of the on a lot of the sort of metrics that I was looking at today in regards to things like hits or hurries or pass rush win rate, right? Like Gabriel Murphy was in a lot of the top 25 edge players
Mhm.
and a lot of these stats, right? 18.4% pass rush win rate was inside the top 25 of edges with at least 100 snaps. 13 hits on the quarterback in 2023 was the 10th most in college football. 40 hurries was the 8th most in college football
Mhm.
for a guy like Gabriel Murphy. So he's intriguing to me. And even just like if you take these like pre-combine and pre-draft rankings with a grain of salt from PFF's big board pre-Senior Bowl
Mhm.
to pre-combine, he's gone up 57 spots in their overall rankings. He's gone from 133 to 76. So he is trending in the right direction to me. I like Gabriel Murphy. He's one of the guys that I kind of
Mhm.
like. And then, you know, the wild card in this mix, I think, is Javon Solomon to me
Yeah.
because he's from Troy. He's smaller. He's only 6
Yeah.
feet tall, right? But a lot of the advanced metrics look good for him. The raw statistics are great on him. He had 17 sacks last year. You worry about the height and length with him, right?
Mhm.
For a guy that's short, 6 feet, he does have almost 34-inch arms. So
Yeah.
you kind of like, he's pretty small, pretty
Yeah.
short for a pass rusher, but he's actually like above average when it comes to arm length.
Yeah.
When you talk about that, I think he's more of a 3-4 outside linebacker at the next level, but
Mhm.
he is certainly a guy that has my attention, and I'll be interested to see how he tests, especially in the strength testing.
Yeah, I mean, my favorite guys on day 2, I love Adiza Isaac out of Penn State. I love Xavier Thomas out of Clemson. I love Gabriel Murphy out of UCLA. When it comes to Murphy and Xavier Thomas, I think those are guys who could be there in the 3rd round, and I think they're plug and play rotational defensive ends. I don't know if they're ever going to be studs in the National Football League, but I think Xavier Thomas and Gabriel Murphy can come in and contribute like 5-6 sacks a year for the entirety of their rookie contracts. Like, I think you're just going to right away get production plug and play in a rotation from these guys. And maybe they develop into more than that. But even if they just are fill in, hey, you're replacing AJ Epinesta's role 4 years on the cheap, but you're a 3rd rounder instead of a 2nd rounder, I'll take that, especially if it doesn't
Mhm.
take 3 years for him to click, like it took
Right.
AJ Epinesa 3 years to click. I think the 3 names to keep an eye out for in the combine on day 2, these are all guys who are on Bruce Feldman's freak list. You mentioned Javon Solomon. He was a former 2-star prospect, 6'2", 250-pounder. He really emerged as a star for one of the best Power 5 programs in the country, the University of Troy. Bruce Feldman, right? He's chiseled, has just 7% body fat. He should test well on the bench, having maxed at 425 pounds. Expect him to run well as he topped out at 21.63 miles an hour game speed in some of his games. Chris Bradwell, the edge from from Alabama. Sometimes he gets a little drowned out by Dallas Turner, but
Mm.
he at Alabama, he had a vertical jump of 38.5 inches. He hit almost 22 miles per hour in the GPS while weighing in at 256 pounds. He's an extremely strong guy. He should test well in Indy. And then finally, Marshawn Nealand, a guy we talked about at the Senior Bowl out of Western Michigan. This guy was a former 400-meter runner and an all-conference high jumper in high school. He's now 6'3", 270 pounds with a 34-inch arms. He clocked almost 20 miles per hour chasing down players this year. His stock is really rising, and I think he's a guy who go on day 2 that'll really surprise some people. So those are some guys that I think to keep an eye out for in Indy. Some other names, some guys maybe on day 3 to look out for. Obviously, you have, let me pull it back up on my notes here. Solomon Byrd from USC, Nelson Caesar from Houston, Miles Cole from Texas Tech, Jalen Harrell from Michigan, Jalix Hunt from Houston Christian, Brennan Jackson from Washington State, Javonte Jean-Baptiste from Notre Dame, Trajan Jeffcoat from Arkansas, Cedric Johnson from Mississippi, Mo Kamara from Colorado State, Braden McGregor from Michigan, Iabi Oki Anoma from Charlotte, David Obu from Houston, Eric Watts from Connecticut, and Zion Tuatipo Fatui out of Washington. I need day 3 guys that you got your eye on. I know we love Jalen Harrell here. We talked about him at the Senior Bowl. Jalen Harrell or anyone else sort of have your eyes for day 3?
Yeah, I mean, I like Jalen Harrell. I think I kind of viewing Xavier Thomas as more of a day 3 guy personally at this
Mhm.
stage in the game, but I can see where you're coming from as far as him potentially being a day, uh, a day 2 guy. Brennan Jackson's interesting to me from Washington State. Followed up a 7-sack season last year with 9 in 2023, 6'4", 264 at least before. That's what he measured at the
Yeah.
Senior Bowl. Shorter arms, under 33-inch arms, so that gives you a little bit of concern. But he has back-to-back seasons with 12 plus tackles for loss. So you wonder how he's going to maybe test athletically. Is he a little stiff? We'll see how he tests at the combine, and
Mhm.
some of those agility drills is where you look to see if a guy like Brennan Jackson maybe performs a little bit better than expected. But he is a day 3 guy that I kind of
Mhm.
have my eye on.
Yeah, I mean, Jalen Harrell's my dude out of the University of Michigan. He's another guy who I think is plug and play from day one and can be like a 5-6 sack a year rotational guy. I love Jalen Harrell. We talked about Nelson Caesar out of Houston with John about how well he looked at the Senior Bowl. So he's definitely a guy on the radar. A couple of others, Javante Jean Baptiste out of Notre Dame. He was an Ohio State transfer. He had 10.5 tackles for losses and 5 sacks last season at Notre Dame. 6'4", 260 pounds. He broad jumped 10.5 last offseason, had a vertical jump of 35 inches, hit 20 miles an hour on the GPS. So he'll probably test well. Pete Nana says Mo Kamara. I love Mo Kamara. He had a big week at the Shrine Bowl, but he's one of those guys where like archetype fit is not there. He's short. He's got short arms. So even though he's uber productive and he looks great, like Mo Kamara is a guy where like I think his body type is probably going to dig him. So yeah, he's a guy who's available on day 3. I think the Buffalo Bills tend to usually avoid those type of guys, especially on day 3. And then I think Miles Cole from Texas Tech is pretty interesting as well with that 87-inch wingspan that he has. Obviously, it doesn't produce much on tape, but he's just a really intriguing athlete. So he's someone the Buffalo Bills might consider like late on day 3 as someone to bring in and sort of develop a little bit. So guys like Miles Cole, you should keep an eye on
That
as
arm
well.
length is nuts for him though,
Mhm.
right? Almost 37-inch arms. I mean,
Yeah,
wingspan. Uh, I mean,
that wingspan is crazy for Miles Cole. All right, on to the defensive tackles now. And again, IDL is also very much in play for the Bills at 28. The top guys range from guys who can go before pick 28 when the Bills pick to guys who are going to go around pick 28 when the Bills pick to guys who could slip back into the 30s or 40s. So this week is going to be sort of a really big week to solidify that. You got, in my opinion, the big 4 right now at defensive tackle. Byron Murphy II, Jason Newton, who's not testing out of Illinois because of an injury, Tavondre Sweat, and then a guy we haven't really talked about a lot, and Chosen One NB comes in and says Chris Jenkins out of Michigan.
mhm.
Chris Jenkins is a guy we haven't talked about a lot either. Byron Murphy, Jason Newton, Tavondre Sweat, Chris Jenkins. What are you looking for from those guys, and are those guys in consideration for you at 28?
I mean, Newton and Murphy, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
I was, the last couple weeks I've been really high on Murphy, and really that he was one of the first guys that I started really digging into as this draft season sort of got underway, and I fell in love with Murphy very quickly. Eric did a really good job, Anthony, on film for him. But then I started looking at Jerzon Newton too, and I was like, wait a minute, like this guy is also pretty legit. And you start to look
Mm-hmm.
at some of the numbers from him, and he had the second most sacks of any interior defensive lineman in college football last year. He's played in over 40 games in his career. He's got the experience. He's got 27.5 tackles for loss in his career. 6'2", 280. You know, that's his height and weight before these measurements come in at the combine. He would really
Mm-hmm.
be a pure backup to Ed Oliver in my mind. So you wouldn't really be getting maybe a ton of immediate return from a guy like Jerzon Newton. I don't think he can really play the one tech,
Mm-hmm.
but he's really intriguing to me as a prospect. And if you're really going for like the best player available, there is a chance that Jerzon Newton could be
Mm-hmm.
that guy. Now, Murphy, I do think is a little bit more versatile, and I think he can play and he can rotate. He's over 300. I think they have him listed at 6'1", 308 on PFF. And, he's played both the A gap and the B gap, the 1-tech and 3-tech alignments. And to me, he would be my preferred option of those guys there. I would be not upset at all if Byron Murphy was on the board number 1 and the Bills made that their pick. Would not upset me in the least.
Yeah, I think Byron Murphy, he tests his way way out of the Bills' range. I think like at 300 plus pounds, he's probably going to run a sub 5-second 40-yard dash, which I think by the time the combine is over, one of the conversations we're going to be having is, the Byron Murphy dream was kind of cool in February.
It was cool while it
lasted. So my attention turns to a couple other guys. I think Tavondre Sweat. I really do, despite the fact that he's a 1-tech. I'm really looking forward to seeing what he weighs, because the guy weighed like 360 something in college. But I think if he can get down into the 330s and show he's serious about getting down into the 330s, and he can look good in the 330s, that's a guy I would consider taking with pick number 28, because even though he's a 1-tech, I think he gives you enough pass rush pop. And I think next to Ed Oliver, that gives you a really good sort of just interior, and you want to be able to get interior pressures in this league. That's what a lot of the way these defenses are going. Newton is a given. The dude's just a freak. He reminds me a lot of Ed Oliver in that way, where he just dominated in college, despite the fact that he has shorter arms himself. Maybe the medicals and not being able to test until his pro day is going to ding a guy like Newton. I've heard a lot of people think Newton is a top 10 to 20 pick. I've heard other people say that like Newton could go top half of the second round. So I've heard a couple of different things from people I trust about where it is Newton is going to go in the draft. So it'll be really interesting to see what comes to fruition there. And then the guy I think we're sleeping on, this is from Bruce Feldman's Freak List. I'm just going to read you sort of the little snippet he had on Chris Jenkins, the son of former NFL star D lineman, same name, or the formerly of the Carolina Panthers, right? Jim Harbaugh refers to Chris Jenkins as the mutant of all mutants. Some of the freaky stuff Jenkins can do that merited the number 1 spot on the Freak List in 2023 won't be relevant at the combine. At 307 pounds, Jenkins did a Turkish getup with a 170 pound dumbbell, the heaviest former Michigan strength coach Ben Herbert has ever witnessed. They also had Mozzie Smith there. Jenkins also had pull-ups with a 100-pound weight strapped to his waist at 307 pounds and could do 760 pounds on the combo twist. This is a guy who is just freaky athletic, freaky strong. We talked a lot about Mozzie Smith last year, and I loved Mozzie Smith. He went a pick after the Bills took Dalton Kincaid. Dallas had him like lose 20 pounds and try to do weird things with him. No, like when you draft a big boy, let the big boy be the big boy. So Chris Jenkins is a guy we don't talk a lot about. And I think a lot of people in Bills Mafia are going to be talking about Chris Jenkins after this combine.
Yeah. I mean, then you start to look at some of the stats that kind of go along with it. And he hasn't been a box score stuffer, right? So you kind of go dig a little bit deeper. He's graded out well as a run defender last year, 13th best of all interior defensive linemen with at least 100 snaps, 4th best stop percentage on the same criteria. So I think for him, it is more about like the opportunity and the situation that he goes to. To me, Chris Jenkins, if he ends up in the right team, in the right situation, he can flourish. But I do think that, the fact that he was on that Michigan front, tons of good players on that Michigan defense, and there's others that we're even going to, talk about in this same show. It's just one of those things where, like, is he worth the pick at 28? I'm not so sure. You have to kind of balance that risk reward with a guy like that. He didn't have necessarily the closing stats in college, but he's got all the tools that you would look for a guy that could be a disruptor at the next level. So, and help you in the run game as well. Right. So it's a tough call for me on Jenkins. I think for me, he's clearly behind the other two right now. But he's certainly in that mix for me with guys like Braden Fisk and Tavondre Sweat. He's kind of in that mix for me.
Trek Reviewer comes in and says, wait, was Beane or McD in Carolina when Chris Jenkins Sr. was. Sean McDermott was not. Sean McDermott didn't get to Carolina until like 2011, 2012, 2013, something like that. Chris Jenkins had already moved on to the New York Jets by then. But Brandon Beane was with the Carolina Panthers from 1998 through 2017. So Brandon Beane was there. He wasn't in a major role. He was simply a personnel guy. But Brandon Beane was in Carolina when Chris Jenkins Sr. was in Carolina. So there is overlap with Brandon Beane. Looking at some of the other defensive tackles, here are some guys whose name, and again, this is a very long list that I have here of possible day 2 guys. So this is day 2, early day 3 guys. Dwayne Carter out of Duke, Tyler Davis out of Clemson, Justin Igbagbe out of Alabama, Braden Fisk out of Florida State, Gabe Hall out of Baylor, Michael Hall Jr. out of Ohio State, McKinley Jackson out of Texas A&M, Jordan Jefferson out of LSU, Rook or out of Clemson. That one I probably should have prepped before I started this show. And Leonard Taylor III out of Miami, and Mason Smith out of LSU. I know Ororo out of Clemson. That's I hope the Bills don't draft him. And Igbagbe out of Alabama are two guys that a lot of people like. Same with McKinley Jackson out of Texas A&M. I'm not very familiar with a lot of their games, so I'm going to spend Combine Week sort of prepping on those guys. How to pronounce their name would be a very good start for me. I'm going to start prepping on a lot of those guys because I haven't really gotten into them yet. But I certainly have some favorites on this list, but I'm going to let you go first. Some of this day 2, early day 3 defensive tackles.
Yeah, I like Dwayne Carter. Eric's obviously been doing a lot of film on him. You know, got to see him play quite a bit here at Duke, right down the way. You know, when John Helpenkamp was on our show, he talked about how good of a week of practice Carter had at the Senior Bowl. You know, flashing a good spin move, speed to power ability, those types of things that you like to see. Look, 5th most batted balls of all interior defensive linemen in college football last year. And again, I think day 2 seems to be a good, reasonable spot for him. I like Tyler Davis as well from Clemson. He was a guy that, as I started looking into him more today, you know, I thought he was potentially a decent fit. It'll be interesting to see, I think, for him, what he weighs in at the combine. He's listed at the Senior Bowl at 299, right? So he's kind of right on that cusp of where do you kind of put him? Could he be a tweener type of guy? We've seen the Bills try to do that in the past with different types of guys, and it hasn't really played out. So it just depends on kind of like, what are you really looking for from these guys on day 2? You know, to me, I like those guys. And of course, Michael Hall, but again, that's be another sort of like what I'll call consolation prize if you weren't to get a Jerzon Newton, right? He's kind of in that same body type as a Jerzon Newton, but probably more of a day 2 type of guy. Again, good week of practice at the Senior Bowl, showed some things there, but you know, there's limitations to his game as well. So athletically, we'll see how he tests. Those are a couple of the guys. Obviously, you've got McKinley Jackson, who's 331. I don't know if the Bills would go up that high, similar to the kind of T'Vondre Sweat. They've never really gone for a guy that weighs that much. So he's in. I like him. But I just don't know if the Bills would go for a guy that big.
Yeah, Tyler Davis made his way onto Bruce Feldman's freak list. 6'2", you mentioned he was 299 at the combine. I'd like to see him get up to around 305. He's listed on the Clemson website at 302. I mean, just this is what they write about him on Bruce Feldman's freak list. Davis is a powerhouse on the field and in the weight room. Having done 30 reps of 225, Davis also moves well for his size. He was timed last offseason 4.95 in the 40-yard dash, so a sub 540 for a guy that big. That's pretty impressive. And then the two names we can't go without mentioning on this podcast, number 1 is Gabe Hall. I think Gabe Hall from Baylor is going to be a day 2 selection. I think he is squarely on the board for the Buffalo Bills in the 3rd round. And I think Gabe Hall is a player that a lot of people are sleeping on. Here is the write-up from Bruce Feldman. Gabe Hall made his freak list. The 6'5", 296-pound Hall, who has, and here's the big thing for me, 34-inch arms. Flashed early at the Senior Bowl. He should make some noise in Indy. He bench presses 500 pounds, and he's hit 19.9 miles per hour on the GPS. Big fan of Gabe Hall. I think he checks a lot of the Bills boxes. And then Braden Fisk is the other one that I know a lot of Bills Mafia is a fan of, despite the fact that he has shorter arms, coming in at 6'3.5", 295 pounds. Fisk is relentless and has a great burst. He notched 9 tackles for losses and 6 sacks at Florida State last season. Scouts told Bruce Feldman this month they expect him to be one of the most impressive D linemen working out. I think the Bills might be lucky if Braden Fisk is on the board at 60 at this point.
Yeah, I wouldn't necessarily bank on him being there at that pick. I think that, but I also would not take him in the first round. So this is the conundrum you end up being in, right? So maybe this is one of those situations where we've seen the Bills with a guy like James Cook. They traded down multiple times. They still got their guy. Maybe that's a situation where you could see the Bills do that. They already have 10 picks, so I don't know how many more picks they're going to want to add, but I feel like Fisk is
trade back and then trade back up and then trade back and then trade, just get all over the board.
I just feel like, and you never know what's going to happen, but he just feels like right now he's in that kind of no man's land for where the Bills pick, right? Either going to pick
a lot of prospects fall in that category right now, which is frustrating.
Yeah, it is a bit frustrating. Yeah.
All right, let's transition now to linebacker. Now, this really isn't the Buffalo Bills race here, right? Like, this is not the world the Buffalo Bills are living in, but there are probably legitimately 6 guys who are competing right now to be the first linebacker taken. Junior Colson out of Michigan, J.D. Bertrand out of Notre Dame, Edgerrin Cooper out of Texas A&M, Cedric Gray out of North Carolina, Jeremiah Trotter Jr., another legacy out of Clemson, and then your guy, NC State guy, Peyton Wilson. Those are the 6 guys who are pretty much competing to be the first linebacker taken. I know if this was 2023 and the Buffalo Bills were still in search of that middle linebacker like we were last year with Jack Campbell, we'd probably spend about 45 minutes just gushing about Peyton Wilson out of NC State. This was Bruce Feldman's mock-up for Peyton Wilson out of NC State. He is one of the best players in the draft, a former standout lacrosse player and state champion wrestler. The 6'4", 235-pounder won the Butkus and Bednarik Awards in 2023. At NC State, Wilson had been clocked in the 40 at 4.49 and ran a 4.21 in his pro agility shuttle last offseason. He bench pressed 390, vertical jumped 35.5, and broad jumped 9.8.5. Don't be surprised if he tops a lot of those numbers at the combine. Peyton Wilson is a freak. Some team is going to get very lucky having him as their middle linebacker in the National Football League.
Yeah, I love Peyton Wilson. Obviously, NC State's season this year was led by their defense. They had inconsistency at quarterback, started multiple quarterbacks this year. They really relied on the run game and that defense to take them through. They were one of the best defenses in the country overall. NC State, it's going to sound homerish, but they have put a lot of guys into the NFL over the last 2 decades. They're one of the teams that you don't think about as far as every day putting talent into the NFL, but they have a very good track record of putting linebackers as well into the NFL. You go back to Nate Irving with the Broncos. You have Jermaine Pratt, who's in the NFL right now. Now the next guy in that lineage, Peyton Wilson. If the Bills needed a middle linebacker, I would be like, take this guy in round 1, even though it's totally homer take. I mean, it's probably not going to be a round 1 pick. I don't think any linebacker really is a round 1 pick this year, but he would be the guy for me. He is a freak, and someone's going to get a really nice player with him. I look at him and I say, this is the guy that we wanted Chad Muma to be. That year we really liked Chad Muma, but Peyton Wilson is a different animal. And you talk about Jack Campbell last year. To me, Peyton Wilson is a better prospect than Jack Campbell personally. And that may sound homer, but I think a lot of people would agree with me on that. So
one of those 6 guys that I mentioned is going to be a Dallas Cowboy. I'll tell you that right now, because I remember Micah Parsons. That's just how dysfunctional Dallas is. Micah Parsons like sat Jerry Jones down at the end of the year and was like, we need linebackers and we need more one techs. And Like, I don't know why you wore one text. You drafted Mozzie Smith and you made him lose 30 pounds. But anyway, that's regardless of that point. So we're not worried about the top 6 linebackers because the Buffalo Bills likely aren't going to draft one of the top 6 linebackers. So after that, it's sort of picking your faves and seeing like who falls to an acceptable range. If you're the Buffalo Bills, can someone tempt the Buffalo Bills to go linebacker in the 4th or the 5th round as opposed to the 6th or the 7th round? I doubt it. But if one of these guys were to sell the Buffalo Bills and taking them in the 4th or the 5th round, Indy is certainly one of the places to do it. I think this position group is more like, hey, next week, let's react to some of the guys who had a good week rather than sort of trying to predict who has a big week now. And then over the course of this week, there might be news of one of these linebackers meeting with the Bills. There might be some scouting buzz about some of these guys. There might be some big testing numbers, et cetera, that'll get us to want to have a deeper conversation. But guys like Michael Barrett, Aaron Casey, Steele Chambers, Tommy Eichenberg, Jalen Ford, Easton Gibbs, Tyron Hopper, Curtis Jacobs, Maris Leofu, Darius Masau, Moema Edjamita out of Wisconsin, Trevor Wallace out of Kentucky, and Nathaniel Watson out of Mississippi State. These are just some of the guys that we could possibly be talking about next week for any multiple number of reasons.
Yeah, Tyrese Knight got an invite to the combine. Just an absolute box score stat stuffer. But I will say this, you got to be wary of a guy like that. I turned on the UTEP. I think they were playing, forgot the game I think they were playing against like some Texas team, and he looked lost, man. It did not look good in coverage. Wasn't taking a lot of good angles to the ball, but then you like look at his overall production, and he had a huge career at UTEP, but they were a bad team. And you wonder about a guy like that who gets invited to the combine. How will he test athletically? Could he raise some eyebrows and get people to turn on some more tape of him? And but he's an interesting name. It's a good year for the Bills to not need a top shelf linebacker because it's a very top heavy class in my opinion. But you're right. This is a wait and see position group right now for us.
Pete Danick comes in and said, I think we'll have to go linebacker late. Who wants to come here as a UDFA with 2 starters and 2 draft picks backing them up? That's a really good point. I think the Bills will naturally be drawn to some of these bigger school guys, Michael Barrett, Steele Chambers, Tommy Eichenberg, Jalen Ford, Maris Leofu out of Notre Dame. I think the Bills will probably be sort of trending in that direction. A guy that could really jump out at them is Trevin Wallace. You know, he was on Bruce Feldman's freak list, 245 pounds. Jim Nagy says he's likely to run in the 4.4s. So who knows? Maybe Trevin Wallace like works his way up into day 2 of the draft with his testing numbers from an early day 3 guy to a day 2 guy. The one guy I have my eye on, one of my favorites, probably in the running for me right now for one of my no matter what players, is Easton Gibbs out of Wyoming. You have Chad Muma coming out of Wyoming. You have Logan Wilson coming out of Wyoming. I think Easton Gibbs is the next in line out of that linebacker factory in Laramie, Wyoming. Former safety in high school. He's got measurables very similar to Matt Milano. So I'm really going to be interested in his testing numbers just to compare those testing numbers to Matt Milano's. Not because I think he's the next Matt Milano, but because the Bills were drawn to Milano for certain reasons. Bills didn't draft Matt Milano thinking he was going to be an all-pro. The Bills drafted Matt Milano thinking he was going to be a depth linebacker special teamer, right? That's what I think Easton Gibbs can be. So it'll be really interesting comparing sort of the intangibles and the athleticism, et cetera, from the former safety Easton Gibbs to the former safety Matt Milano. So that's a name that I'm personally going to have my eye on as we move forward. All right, on to the secondary now. And speaking of the secondary, this is another position, cornerback, where this is very much going to be, hey, did the Bills meet with somebody? Is there scouting buzz around somebody? Did somebody's testing numbers pop off the charts? I think for now, the bigger need is safety, and we're going to focus on safety. And we're just going to completely pretty much skip DB or cornerbacks at this point. But don't put it past the Buffalo Bills to draft a cornerback late, especially maybe someone who's got special teams flex. A guy like MJ Devonshire from Pittsburgh could possibly be a return man for the Buffalo Bills. He's a guy who could be an option in the 5th, 6th, 7th round. But when watching cornerback coverage this week, I do think what I'm going to have my ear out for is them talking about guys who could move to safety. And those are the cornerbacks that I'll be paying attention to. One name I've already heard rumored is Ryan Watts out of Texas. Now he's a bigger guy, like a Jaron Curse, big box safety type at 6'4". But remember a couple of years ago, Daxton Hill,
Yeah.
right? Who knows? Maybe there's a couple of corners in Indy where that kind of buzz starts to build around those type of corners. And then all of a sudden that makes that cornerback a day one or a day two option for the Buffalo Bills because they could project to move that player to safety. Like, I wonder if the Bills could be vibing on any of these corners as safeties, much like they did when they transitioned Jordan Poyer and Micah Hyde, and to a much lesser extent, Cam Lewis previously.
Who was the guy Kendall loved a couple years ago? Darren Hall.
Julian Love transition from corner to safety as well. Yeah.
I mean, look, I think if it fits and like athletically, it makes sense for the Bills to kind of look that direction. But like, you're gonna obviously, if you're the Bills, I think you're looking at safety first, and then in the case where like you have guys maybe rated significantly further apart, and you have a corner who maybe could play safety, and you just love his athletic profile and there's things you like about him a lot more than a safety that is much lower on your board. Maybe that's where the Bills would then turn and think about taking a guy like that with the intention in mind to have him at safety.
Yeah. Looking at some of the top safeties to keep an eye out for, the top dog is Cooper DeJean. He's a cornerback / safety. It all depends on what you need, because Cooper DeJean is just a really good football player. So if your team needs a cornerback, Cooper DeJean is on your board as a corner. If your team doesn't need a cornerback but needs a safety, Cooper DeJean is on your board as a safety because he's just a darn good football player. He will not be testing with an injury. So traditional safeties, not safety / corners. The top two, I believe, in this draft are Cam Kinchins out of Miami and Tyler Nubin out of Minnesota. It's going to be interesting just to get a feel and a vibe for how the NFL views those two over the course of this week, as well as watching them test. And I think two guys who could possibly be the first safety off the board and could surprise, Bo Braid from Maryland. I think that's going to be a household name after this week. And Jaden Hicks out of Washington State.
Yeah, I mean, to me, Nubin's safety number one in this class. I don't know. I mean, with the
He's
way
my
that
top safety as well. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, he's my safety number one right now. I think I want to put Kinchins number two, but I haven't really decided who I'm going to put number two yet. But to me, like, Tyler Nubin's interesting, right? Because the NFL has kind of went through a phase where they somewhat devalued safeties, but then you see last year what happens when you have an all-pro caliber type of safety like a Kyle Hamilton, and the Ravens picked him sort of at the end of the first round a couple years back. So Tyler Nubin to me is a wild card. Like, we start talking about these guys like Byron Murphy, who probably won't make it to the Bills, or whoever. Like, Tyler Nubin probably won't make it, but like, there's a chance he's there. And like, if you're the Bills, like, you saw what Brandon or Sean McDermott said today. He said, we haven't really talked to Micah Hyde since the end of the season. We don't know what his plan, like, we're all just assuming Micah Hyde's not coming back. If Tyler Nubin's staring you in the face at pick 28, like, it would be kind of tough to pass that up, in my opinion, with how much the Bills really have relied on that position here over the years.
Regardless of position, I think Tyler Nubin is my favorite player in this draft. I really I really think he might be my favorite player in this draft. Like, I haven't really sat down and thought about, like, do I have a favorite player in this draft? But if I really sat down and thought about it and like did a little mental exercise, I think Tyler Nubin would be in the top 5, probably maybe even number 1 as like one of my favorite players in the draft. And he just seems like such a natural fit, like somebody who would come into a Sean McDermott system and just be an outstanding football player and produce. So I really like Tyler Nubin. Whether the Bills want to use the 28th pick on a safety, I don't know. That's a philosophical discussion that we can save for another day. Some teams don't mind taking safeties that late in the first round. Other teams are like, no, you can't take a safety that high. So it all depends on sort of your poison. I think, like I said, Bo Braid, I think from Maryland, is going to surprise some people. The next grouping of safeties that I have here are the day 2 guys, and they're really jockeying for position. Your guy, Cole Bishop out of Utah, Javon Bullard out of Georgia, who I know Eric is very high on. Kalen Bullock, the center fielder out of USC. That USC defense was terrible. Kalen Bullock might be the one silver lining in that whole Alex Gibb defense. Malik Mustafa out of Wake Forest has a lot of fans, as well as Tyke Smith out of Georgia. Those are sort of the day two guys that I think are secure in their day two-ness, but it's all about where they go on day two. And certainly if one of these guys tests terribly, they could fall into day three. I think the combine's huge for Cole Bishop. I know that he's going to be a better football player than he is going to be an athlete, but I think if Cole Bishop tests really well, he could push himself into like being the second or third safety off the board.
Yeah, the testing's going to be important for him, right? Because he did a lot of his work kind of at and near the line of scrimmage.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, I talked about him a lot last week and feel like he'd be just like that pure 111 type of guy. And we obviously know the history of him being able to like practice against Dalton Kincaid and practice and things like that. It's played a lot of games, but he really was more effective at the line of scrimmage, and I think as a blitzer than he was in coverage. So the testing could go a long way, maybe in helping at least solidify his perception among the GMs there that he could athletically do a little bit more of like split safety work at the next level. And not to say that he didn't in college, because he did, but it's a whole different animal there. But yeah, we know. My love for Cole Bishop. I think Jalen Simpson's a day two guy potentially too.
Yeah.
I know Anthony's been doing a lot of film work on him, and
Anthony loves him. Yep,
loves him. At first when I started watching him, I said that's to Anthony. Like he seemed a little slender to me, but so it'd be interesting to see how he comes in as far as like height and weight. At the Senior Bowl, he only came in at 178, so definitely on the more slender side. And you love his nose for the ball. He's got that like Taron Johnson vibe where he's like the undersized dude, but he has no fear. But 178, that's small.
That's why I had him in my next grouping of sort of safeties to keep an eye on. I had three names. I had Keaton Oladapo from Oregon State, who I know has a lot of fans. Another box safety type. Jalen Simpson, who you mentioned, Anth is a huge fan of, out of Auburn. And then my guy, right, Dadrian Taylor Demerson out of Texas Tech. I'm a really big fan of his. I think if he tests well the week he had the Shrine Bowl, he could sneak into the third round and it wouldn't shock me. I'm a really big fan of his game. There are two wild cards that we need to keep an eye on too. One is Sione Vaki out of Utah, Cole Bishop's running mate there. Yep. He might not even be a DB. He might be a running back in the National Football League. So that's a guy to keep an eye on. And another guy to keep an eye on is James Williams, because he's probably going to be a linebacker in the National Football League. So if you have a James Williams who's like
what do you do with that guy?
Tweener, but if he's sitting around in like the fourth or the fifth round, like that might be like a skill set that could intrigue the Bills. I don't know. So the James Williams is a guy just to keep an eye on, just to listen to, like, what are the scouts saying about him? Like, what's the buzz around James Williams? I think James Williams is going to be one of the more talked about guys at the combine, especially on DB day, just because of just how interesting he is. And, he could have special teams upside with his makeup as well. So James Williams will be a really interesting guy to keep an eye on. Some other names, and I'm not going to lie to you, the back half of the safety class I'm not too familiar with. So this is the week to get familiar with them. Like, just turn on NFL Network, watch the DBs working out. Like, they tell all these little stories and they give all these little nuggets on players, and you start to get a vibe for some of these guys. And then you go and you dig deeper into these guys, and all of a sudden a guy who you didn't hear of, like you didn't know existed a week ago, all of a sudden becomes one of your favorite draft prospects, just because of something you heard at the combine got you to do a little bit more digging on a certain player. But you got Millard Bradford out of TCU, Jalen Carley's out of Missouri, Dominique Hampton out of Washington, who I think I'm going to start doing a little bit of work on because he's pretty versatile and moves around a little bit. Jalen Key out of Alabama, Patrick McMorris out of Cal, Tyler Owens out of Texas Tech, Josh Proctor out of Ohio State, DeCamarion Richardson out of Mississippi State, Andre Sam out of LSU, and Evan Williams out of Oregon, who had a big Senior Bowl. Tyler Owens is interesting. He made it to Bruce Feldman's freak list. 6'2", 205 pounds. Owens is something, this is Bruce Feldman's words here. Owens is something of an eye-catching talent who could become an elite player on special teams. That stuck out to me. He's big, explosive safety who could excel in Indy. Last offseason, he vertical jumped 40 inches. He also clocked at more than 23 miles per hour in a game. So Tyler Owens out of Texas Tech, name to keep an eye on in the safety group.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of with you. Oladapo, I think, is day 3 right now for me. There's a lot of guys at the back, like Jalen Green is another guy from Mississippi State, I think could be interesting. But I think if you're looking at guys in day 3, one of the things that, at least for me, that I'm going to pay a lot of attention to is their snap counts and sort of their alignments. So I look at a guy like Kenny Logan Jr. from Kansas, who basically played a dead even amount of snaps at free safety and in the box. So I want to see guys maybe on day 3 that are a little bit more versatile. Those are the guys that you're looking for to kind of fill out depth, right, on the roster. Maybe not asking them to be a starter day 1, but maybe asking them to come in and like find their way, right? Find their way. Like, okay, this guy's played both in the box and deep. Like maybe he can find his way into a role on the team. So I think in my philosophy has always been, not to get on the tangent here, like for your studs, for your early round picks, pick guys that are just really good at something. They don't have to be versatile necessarily. When you start to get to day 3, that's when you start, I think, for me, looking for more versatility.
That's exactly what stuck out to me about Dominique Hampton out of Washington, 6'3", 220 pounds. Here is his total snap counts this season: 26 snaps on the defensive line, 298 snaps in the box, 249 at slot corner, 36 at wide corner, 366 at free safety, and he also played 44 punt coverage snaps and 56 field goal extra point snaps. So this guy played over 1,000 snaps at Washington this year, all over the place on defense and special teams. So a guy like Dominique Hampton, I think, could really stick out to the Buffalo Bills on day 3, just out of that versatility alone. So that's a name that I'm going to dig deeper into, and that's a name I think Bills Mafia should keep an eye out for this weekend as the NFL Combine kicks into high gear. All right. Thank you guys so much for joining us this evening as we sort of previewed the defensive players to look out for in the NFL Scouting Combine this year. We're going to be back on Thursday at 9 p.m., same exact time. It won't be live. It'll be pre-recorded, but you can hop into the comment section. You can comment along with us as we break down the offensive prospects that you can keep an eye out for here in the NFL Scouting Combine in Indy. Dave, any final thoughts before we head out of here?
No, it's a fun week. It's definitely like a lot of vibe checks, right? I think you said it right. There's hundreds and hundreds of players, right? Going like, so it's not like one of those things where like you have to like every single guy, even though we end up kind of trying to do that. Like if you like certain guys because you have a good vibe with them or they do something cool in Indy, like that's great. Like I like this time of year because I like the fact that people can have different opinions. What I don't like is when one of my pet peeves of draft season is when people are like, oh, there's no way this guy is going to be in this round, or I can't believe you think that about this guy. Like the NFL draft is one of the things in the entire NFL landscape that people are wrong about more than they're right. So just enjoy it, like who you like. And, if you like a guy, someone in the comment section mentions a guy you like, and maybe I haven't heard of him or we haven't done the research, we're going to look into it because that's just what we do here.
All right. Thank you guys so much for joining us again. Upcoming shows this Thursday, 9 p.m. We'll be previewing offense. Next week, we'll be recapping the combine, talking about any rumors that we're hearing out of Indianapolis. And then the week after that, we are on to not predicting, but reacting to the NFL offseason, and free agency kicks off in just about 2 weeks. So thank you guys again. And until next time, go Bills.
Go Bills.
Thank you for watching tonight's episode of the Air Raid Hour. Make sure to hit that like button on the way out. If you are catching the show on demand, leave a reply in the comment section and we will respond over the course of the week. You can always listen to every episode next day on all major podcasting platforms, including Apple Podcasts and Spotify, by searching Air Raid Buffalo. Thank you for your continued support, and as always, go Bills!